So my name is Regan. I'm the director and staff attorney of the Civil Liberties Defense Center, and we want to welcome you tonight to this Know Your Rights training. We're going to take about an hour to do a Know Your Rights training for activists. We're going to go over the basic rights you have when you're out on the streets interacting with police officers. We'll also go over some of the more common crimes or infractions that activists in the past might face and what they are and what they mean to us. And then I'd ask that you save any questions for the end, and we can have a brief Q&A time period. I'm going to start off by kind of dispelling probably one of the biggest concerns that I've heard so far in the last week, and that is, I don't want to get arrested, so I don't want to come to the rally, come to the occupation, and whatever. So in case anybody has to ditch out early before we get to this point, in order for the police to arrest you for trespassing, or really the vast majority of crimes that we're going to be dealing with in these types of situations, they have to give us a warning. So there will be announcements made that will say, leave or be arrested, get on the sidewalk or be arrested, or something, and you will be arrested. And at that point, you have the choice to either walk away and avoid arrest, or intentionally know that you might be placing yourself in that scenario. So for those of you that have concerns about kind of getting randomly picked up unknowingly and unwillingly, that's very, very unlikely to happen. All right, so we're going to kind of focus on three of the primary rights that you have under both the U.S. and Oregon constitutions. Your right to remain silent, your Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. This is also called your right to privacy, and of course your First Amendment right. Your First Amendment right being, the right to assemble as well as the right to free speech. So we have the right to congregate as well as speak our minds, however we may choose to do that. So your Fifth Amendment right is probably one of your most important. You've probably heard the phrase, I'm taking the Fifth. And what this means is you never, ever, ever have to answer a question put to you by anyone, except for a judge in a courtroom. So whether it's the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, sheriff, local police, your principal, your mother, you never have to answer questions put to you unless you're in a courtroom by a judge. The only way you ever have to answer those questions is if you willingly consent to answering them. That's an absolute right. You don't even have to say your name, though we will discuss what the possible ramifications of that will be. So the bottom line, if you don't remember anything else regarding the Fifth Amendment, is you never have to answer anything put to you by anyone. Your Fourth Amendment right means you've got a right to privacy. You have the right to be free from being searched by the police. Your car, your home, all of those things are protected. The general way that police are able to do those things is because you consent to them. If you let the police officer into your house, if you shrug your shoulders and just kind of like go like this, all of those things mean that you're giving them permission, and that means you have no right to fight about it later on. The other main way that the police are going to be able to search your home or search your property is because they have a warrant. That's normally very unlikely in the scenarios we're going to focus on today. The other way that they may be able to search you or your property is if they are going to detain you, meaning they're investigating you for a crime. And we're going to talk in a lot more detail about that as we pull through this. In a post-9/11 world with a Patriot Act, a lot of our Fourth Amendment rights have been taken away. Email, cell phone communication, face crack, all of those things are highly monitored by the government, and they don't need a warrant to do it. I should also note that when we're in a public space like this, Police officers have the right, like every other citizen, to be present and to enjoy this training, and we hope they will if they're here. So, okay, your First Amendment right, I think we all know this, but don't forget that the First Amendment allows us to assemble, to grieve our issues with the government, and especially in what's called public forums. In the law, there are two different kinds of forums. There's a public forum and a private forum. You have the most constitutional rights to First Amendment expression in a public forum. And the general gist of this is, if traditionally we would expect that free speech occurred at that type of place, then it's going to be protected. Public sidewalks, public parks, places called Free Speech Plaza, national forests, all of those have been deemed public forums, which means we have the most expansive rights to express ourselves. That can be in burning the flag, that can be in using profanity. All of those might be the edges of what we consider free speech, but they're all protected First Amendment expression. The only exceptions to that are doing things like yelling fire in a crowded movie theater or defaming someone. If I say you have a loathsome disease and it's not true and you end up losing money because of my false statement, that's what slander and libel and defamation are. And those aren't protected. But everything else basically is. Everything else. The last paragraph. If you are a non-documented citizen, if the government can come up with a legitimate reason to deport you, you may have an extra concern in exercising First Amendment rights in a public forum. Regardless of 9/11, regardless of the Patriot Act or anything else, our constitutional rights cannot be taken away. If we don't exercise them, they will be diminished. And so being part of a movement like Occupy Eugene is a powerful affirmation that these rights are alive and well, and we need to vigilantly and diligently exercise them. So, when you're dealing with cops, there are basically 3 different levels of dealing with a cop. When I use the word cop, I'm talking about sheriffs, Eugene police, FBI, ICE. You name the 3-letter word, they all will be under the gamut of cop for this training.
Excuse me, ICE?
ICE is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They sometimes called La Migra. Okay, so 3 different levels. Each one has a different level of seriousness and a different level of what you can do and not do. First level is mere conversation. Second level is detention. Third level is arrest. And these are all listed in that brochure too. So I can walk up to any of you and ask you who is your leader or what is your social security number, and you of course have the choice to tell me that you don't want to answer that information. In the same way, the police can walk up to any of us and engage us in conversation in the same way. But we have the exact same right to simply tell them we choose not to speak with them and slowly walk away. And in general, in protest scenarios, we advise you to not engage with the police. Often they are attempting to look for information that shouldn't be disclosed to them. If they think that they've got an easy source of information, you will be contacted repeatedly, usually by them. And you never know what you're saying and how it might be used against yourself or others. The other thing too, without a witness, your statements could be misconstrued or changed in some way. When you are interacting with police, if you choose to do that, you should be aware that you are likely being recorded. Almost all police officers these days have audio, if not video, recording capabilities on them at all times. So we advise that if you choose not to speak with the police, you should politely but firmly simply walk away. And we say slowly walk away because if they change their minds and decide that they're going to arrest you or detain you, we don't want you getting jumped and tackled to the ground. So slowly walk away. But put some distance between yourself and that officer. If the officer sidles up to you at a rally and starts trying to engage you in conversation and you don't want that conversation, don't just stand there and try to pretend like he's not still standing next to you. Put some distance between you.
Do they have to identify themselves?
They don't, especially if they're undercover. Police officers are allowed to lie in order to investigate crimes. The example I give is if an undercover drug cop has infiltrated a drug cartel and you ask them, are you a cop? They certainly don't have to tell you. And they do not have to identify themselves. If they're in uniform, though, they are supposed to be wearing a badge and so that it shows their agency as well as their name. If you ever see a police officer with their name covered up with duct tape or something, is often the case, that is actually strictly against police policy, and the only reason a police officer would do that is because he himself is likely breaking the law. You should probably try to photograph that, and we can deal with it afterward. In legal land, silence means agreement. If the police ask me to search my backpack and I stand there like a deer in the headlights, I am literally saying, yes, officer, search my backpack. You have to make your consent known in words. Don't shake your head or shrug your shoulders, say, I don't consent to this search, or whatever it is that's happening to you. So the next level is detention. The police can detain you if they think that you have committed a crime or are about to commit a crime. That means that they are legally allowed to make you stay there while they investigate whether or not you actually have committed a crime or not. They have to be able to tell you what the reasonable suspicion is that they have that you've committed a crime or are about to commit a crime. If you're being detained, then you have to give them 3 pieces of information. If you're being detained, in Oregon, we never have to produce identification unless we are the driver of a vehicle. So often if you're being detained, the police will say, let me see your ID. You don't have to show them your ID, but you have to tell them your name, date of birth, and address. If you choose not to give them your ID, you should probably proactively give them your name, date of birth, or address. If you don't, they are allowed to take you into custody just for the purposes of identifying you. So they take you down to the pokey, they run your fingerprints, and they come up with your identity. So we'll talk about these magic words that we want you to say so that you can figure out which of these stages you're in. But basically, if a police officer says, hold on, I want to ask you a few questions, we're going to train you tonight to say, am I being detained or am I free to leave? This is a yes or no question. Am I being detained? Yes or no. If it's yes, that means they are investigating you for a crime, and you should probably assert your Fifth Amendment rights. If they say no, that means you're at that conversation stage, and you should say, I choose not to speak with you, and slowly walk away. And we'll kind of go over this a couple times throughout the night. If you are stopped by the police, first thing you should do is take a deep breath. Focus, be calm. You never want to run or physically resist, even if you think what they're doing is illegal. They will only add charges to you and probably injure you as well. And like I said, basically you just want to ask, am I free to leave? And do so accordingly. We're not really going to focus tonight on motor vehicles because that's really not the focus of tonight's training, but there are some different, obviously if you're a driver of a motor vehicle, you've got to produce a driver's license. So there's some slight differences there. Like I said, you got to give them your address, your name, and your date of birth. It is a crime to give a false name, and that includes a pseudonym. If for the purpose of Occupy Eugene, your name is now going to be Ground Squirrel, if you give that to the police, that is giving false information to a police officer and can be a separate crime. If you are being detained, the police are allowed to do what's called a pat-down search. This means they're allowed to pat the outside of your clothing, and they are only looking, or supposed to be looking, for weapons that you could use to injure them. This is an officer safety search only. But if you are carrying a backpack, they may be allowed to open the backpack or anything within your wingspan, and again, only looking for weapons. If you are detained, we ask that you write down everything you can remember as soon as possible, especially if you end up going to jail. This can be important information for your lawyer. Police can lie, like I mentioned. They can promise that if you give them information, they won't arrest you. They can promise that they will not charge you with certain things. None of it is enforceable. The police can make you all the promises in the world, and they don't have to ever act upon them. And you will not have any witnesses other than police officers to what's happening. And again, you know, regardless of what they promise you, there is no way that you can enforce it. If you are detained by the police, they are not allowed to move you at that stage. So if they, you know, say, why don't you come down this dark alley, we'd like to ask you a few questions, you are allowed to say, actually, I'd rather stay here amongst all of my people with witnesses. If you are under arrest, if they place you under arrest, and the handcuffs go on, obviously then they're allowed to walk you to the police car and take you to jail. But until you're actually placed under arrest, you don't have to go anywhere with them. And as we will drill into your heads tonight, if you're arrested, you want to immediately ask for a lawyer and assert those Fifth Amendment rights. If you're under 18, you have all the same rights as what we're talking about tonight, identical. But one difference is if a teen is arrested, if you're under 18 and you're arrested and you go to jail, you know, if you're over 18, you can be released on your own recognizance. That means that they let you out without paying bail. You know, the door just swings open. If you're under 18, your parent or guardian has to physically come to the jail and pick you up. So if you know of any out-of-town teens coming to occupy Eugene, make sure that some kind of permission slip is negotiated for them so that a friend, you know, an adult friend could potentially get them out of jail if need be. In protest scenarios, if you were to be arrested, if you choose to be arrested, it's likely going to be for a misdemeanor. In Lane County Jail, because we have such an overcrowded jail, most people who are arrested for a misdemeanor will be out of custody in about 6 hours. Because they're nonviolent offenses, you're the first to be let out of jail. So it's very unlikely that anyone who would be arrested in Eugene would really even spend the night in jail. But at most, in Oregon, you have to go in front of a judge and be arraigned within 48 hours. So within 2 days, you have to be brought in front of a judge. You might be, you know, qualified for a court-appointed lawyer, and you can deal with a release issue at that point, in a worst-case scenario. If you are injured during your arrest, or if you have an injury pre-existing, you need to be a very squeaky wheel. You need to tell the jailers over and over again what your needs are. If you have a medical condition like diabetes or something where you have required medications, think twice before purposefully putting yourself in an arrest scenario. Even if you had your medication in your pocket, the jail is not allowed to give it to you. They have to get it to come in through a pharmacy because it might be LSD or something in their minds. So if you have a medical condition, as soon as you get arrested, you need to start demanding your needs, medically speaking. And ideally, if you've got it, you know, especially if you are going to choicefully get arrested, you may want to have a copy of your prescription in your pocket at the time of arrest so that the jail medical staff can then obtain your medications for you as soon as possible. Like I said, it's really unlikely anybody would even spend the night, and if you've got a medical condition, you're probably going to be first in line to get out because they don't want to deal with you, but just so you know that that's the situation.
Will you be allowed to keep a camera to take these photographs?
No. No.
Then how would you take photographs?
Well, the photographs are normally taken after you get out of jail, especially with things like bruising and issues of that nature. Waiting 24 hours is not a big deal. If you actually are really injured, the jail medical staff has cameras and you can insist upon having your injuries photographed. Yeah.
Medic ID bracelets, are those, is there a preference? Medic ID bracelet, necklace, what?
They're going to take it from you once you're in jail. All jewelry is normally removed if you're going to be taken into custody. But the ID bracelet at least corroborates the statements you're going to be making that you've got a serious medical condition. So I'd say wear them, but once you get into the jail, it's not really going to be an issue. The police can arrest you if they witness you breaking the law. So if you symbolically walk down to the front doors of the courthouse, you are breaking the law right in front of them and they're going to be able to arrest you. Otherwise, they need either a warrant or they need corroborating individuals to say that they saw you breaking the law. The law actually says that even one informant can be enough for a police officer to come and arrest you. So there's that. Once you are arrested, they're going to take you to the jail, most likely. They can actually give you a ticket and just release you on the scene, but normally these days with protest situations, they are concerned you're just going to go back onto the line and repeat your offense. So normally they are actually handcuffing you and taking you to jail. At that point, when you go to the jail, because they're putting you in this secure facility with other criminals, at that point they can do what's called a skin search. This is not a strip search. This just means that they are allowed to make you take off your jewelry, empty your pockets. They can give you fun jail clothes to wear, though very often that's not the case, especially when you're a short timer. Normally you don't even change into jail clothes. But they are permitted to do that. But it's not, what people think of, like they're going to be crawling up your orifices with magnifying glasses or anything like that. They can only do that in serious, like murder crimes or if they think that you're bringing in contraband. We have a brochure in the back for people with transdermal piercings. For those of you that don't know what those are, they're the ones that kind of look like they're implanted in somebody's cheek. They can't just take those out like we can take out our earrings. If you have transdermals, please pick up one of those brochures. Keep it in your pocket in case you go to jail to make sure that you are safe once you get to jail. If you are taken into custody, at that point they're allowed to do an inventory search of like your backpack and stuff. This is basically supposed to be a search so that you don't accuse them of stealing stuff from you. But when they're doing that search, if you happen to have an Altoids tin full of marijuana, you can be charged with it at that point if they find it. And you are permitted to be searched by a person of your own gender. If there are any people here from the transgender community, the law says that you are going to be treated as you were with the biological equipment you were born with. So if your birth certificate says you are female and you have female biological parts, you will be housed with females and treated as a female regardless of your self-identity, unfortunately. So, if you are arrested, we want you to say, I'm going to remain silent and I want a lawyer. This puts a magic bubble around you that makes it illegal for the police to continue questioning you. Anything you say after you say this magic phrase cannot be used against you in court. However, if at some point, as you're driving to the jail, the police say, nice weather we're having, or great protest, and you forget that you just put this magic bubble around you, and you start talking to them, you have popped your own bubble, and now you have to re-say this phrase in order to get that protection back around you. So if you get nervous and you start chatting with them and then you remember, oh yeah, that lawyer told me that I should put this bubble around me, then just restate, I am going to remain silent, I want a lawyer, or even just say, I'm taking the fifth. Both phrases mean the same thing, and you'll have that protection around you. Be prepared potentially to be interrogated, but know that you have absolutely no obligation at all to answer any questions. With this type of event and this type of protest, we're not really expecting anything scary, but you know, I'm sure you've all seen the movies where people will play good cop, bad cop, and they can really put the elbow into you a little bit. So, you know, if somehow one of you ends up in that scenario, be prepared potentially to be interrogated. Even if you don't know how to spell the word lawyer, you are entitled to say this phrase. They have to give you a phone book and a reasonable number of phone calls to find one, or call your family members to have them assist you. We're hoping by Saturday to have a designated phone line in case anyone does get arrested and wants to call out for assistance. And we do have over 30 volunteer lawyers right now lined up ready to help if anything happens, and that includes going to the jails. So you've probably all heard of Miranda rights from TV. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. This is all your Miranda rights. It's long and not very entertaining. So we have come up with an easier version for you to remember. Your demand of rights. We're not asking for them. These are your rights. If you don't exercise them, they won't exist. So I'm not going to talk to you or anyone about anything, period. I am not going to speak to anyone until I have a lawyer present. Don't forget, part of the reason this is important is even if you want to confess to the sun and moon, you want a witness to what you are saying. You know, so even if you think you want to cooperate with the police, wait till you have a lawyer present so that if you say the sun rises in the east, it doesn't end up in a police report that you said the sun rises in the west and you have no corroboration for it. I won't answer any questions or reply to any charges without my lawyer present. I don't agree to perform any tests, consent to any searches, DNA, hand samples, writing samples, hair samples, you know, all sorts of things. Unlikely to happen in our scenarios, but just know you have an absolute right to not do any of it. There is an exception for DUI stuff, and we're not going to talk about that tonight. If you want to know about that, you'll come to a different Know Your Rights training that we do. Don't sign anything unless your lawyer tells you to. There is one exception to this. If you end up in jail, they will not let you out of jail unless you sign a release agreement. This says, I'll come to court, I'll obey all laws, and sometimes it has other conditions in it as well. We advise you to just sign it, get out, and if it's got weird, funky stuff, we will deal with it in the courts after the fact. Get out, and we will deal with it afterward. Yeah?
If you are detained and the police ask for permission for a test or something similar, you have to give them an answer, right? Or it's considered consent?
Just say, I do not consent.
Okay, and then you have to re-enroll the fifth?
After you say, I don't consent?
Yeah.
You know, safety would say, go ahead and spit it out again, but you probably will not need to. Legally, if it went to court and it really came push to shove, saying I don't consent would not waive your Fifth Amendment rights. Saying nice weather and you look cute in that uniform is probably good. And the bottom one that got cut off is probably the one, you know, if you only remember one thing tonight, you should remember this one, and it says, I will not waive any of my constitutional rights. If you can spit that out, you've got at least the baseline covered. Grand juries, we're not going to deal with those because hopefully we won't need to. And now we're going to look at some sample conversations with the police. So, you know, cop's going to come up to you and be like, hi, nice protest. Who's your leader? Where is the organizers? Where are you going next? You know, anything like that. And you should say, are you detaining me or am I free to leave? And they're going to say, well, what are you afraid of? I just want to talk to you, blah, 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 you know. And you should say, you know, I choose not to speak with you, thank you, and slowly walk away. If it goes a different direction, you say, are you detaining me or am I free to go? And they say, you're being detained or you're not free to go. Then you know that's the trigger. You're now on to phase 2. They want to arrest you. At that point, you want to be invoking those Fifth Amendment rights. But first, before you do that, you're allowed to say, why am I being detained? Make them tell you the basis of the detention. If you don't know. Obviously, if people are doing a symbolic sit down in the middle of the street, you probably don't need to know why you're being detained, and that question might be a little frivolous. But just know that once you're being detained, that's when they're allowed to do that pat-down search on you. And that can be of a person of your own gender if you insert that you want that. If you don't already know why you're being detained, make sure you remember what they told you was the reason. Because if it changes, once we get to court, that could be a defense for you. And then the final stage, the cop says you're being detained. They might just jump right to you're under arrest, and they grab you and they throw you to the ground and they start handcuffing you. We're going to talk a little bit in a second about what is resisting arrest or what is interfering with police officers and things like that. But know that if they say you're under arrest, especially for young males, I always kind of suggest when you're interacting with cops, they want to see your hands. Don't stuff them in your hoodie pocket. The hands are what they're going to be looking at. So to have the safest interactions possible, make sure that your hands are visible. And if they say that you're going to be, they say you're under arrest, that means you're going to be handcuffed usually. The safest way for you to do that is for you to put your hands behind your own back. Otherwise, they're going to pop your shoulder out and ratchet the cuffs on you nice and tight. So especially if you're choosing to be arrested, preserve your body. Know that you're going to be handcuffed. Don't tense up and try to make it so that they can't get your hands behind your back. They're going to do it. And if they can't do it by themselves, they've got 3 big buddies that are going to help them do it, and then you're going to be in pain. And obviously, if they say you're under arrest, you're going to invoke those Fifth Amendment rights. I'm going to remain silent. I want a lawyer. We don't need to talk about airports tonight. I'm not going to go into, other than what I mentioned for non-documented people, we're not going to talk about that. This document, I just want to briefly mention to you, it's tiny and I don't want you to read it, but what I want you to know about it is it's called a consent to group representation. If an affinity group chooses a symbolic arrest at any time during this occupation, you are permitted to be represented as a political group by a single lawyer or a group of lawyers if you all consent to it. This agreement basically says, all for one, one for all. We're not going to snitch on each other. Our interests are aligned. We want the politics in our case. We want to be represented as political people, and we want to work together as a group to form our defense and present it to the court and whatnot. So regardless of what ends up happening, if any of you end up with lawyers and you want group representation, you can mention that Lauren's got a nice template that she's willing to share with anyone. And then everybody signs it, and that's what makes it lawful. So this fun thing here is a flow chart of what happens to you when you go to court. And I'm going to walk through it really quickly. So up at the top in the bright pink, it says warning. That's what I was talking about, where we're going to use the scenario of a trespass, because that's probably the most common offense that activists may face. So the police are going to say, you are trespassing, leave or be arrested. And at that point, you've got a choice to stay and face arrest or leave and get out of there and have no problems. If you choose to stay and you are arrested, the police will ask you for your information. You can either give them your name, date of birth, or address, or not. If you give them your info, there is a chance that they could give you a ticket and send you on your way. If you don't give them your identifying information, they will definitely take you to jail for at least the purposes of identifying you. Once you go to jail, you will deal with the booking desk. They will ask you a bunch of information, including your employment and where you live and who lives with you and all sorts of things like that. You don't have to give any of that information, though they can use it in determining whether or not they're going to release you or not. In order to release you, they're supposed to make sure that you're not going to break the law again and that you're going to show up for court. Basically, that you're not a threat to the community and that you're going to come to court. And so some of those questions on those booking forms have to do with those issues. If you give them your information, they can release you It's called release on your own recognizance. You can ask for it yourself. You don't have to wait for them to do it for you. It's also called OR, if you want to talk the lingo. If you are going to be released, they're going to ask you to sign a release agreement. If you sign it, you'll be let out until your next court date. If you don't sign it, you're going to be in custody until you go to court, basically. And once you're out, the next thing that will happen is your arraignment. That's a court appearance where you plead not guilty. They tell you what you're officially being charged with, and they give you a next court date. You can get a lawyer if you want it. From there, the court process kind of unfolds. Your lawyer will get police reports. There might be plea negotiations. You might go to trial. In the outcome of that, whether it's a plea deal or if you go to trial and you're found guilty, the judge is the person who puts up your punishment. The judge has discretion in what your punishment is. But for most misdemeanors that any of y'all will probably face, you're talking about somewhat modest fine, maybe some road crew or community service, and maybe a year or two of unsupervised probation. That basically means that obey all laws and pay your fines and stuff like that. There are different things that we always try to work when we represent activists. Sometimes people choose to want to go to trial as the political act in and of itself. There are all different things that you can do, but we won't go into abundant detail on that.
If you are there, they say, you're trespassing, and you decide you don't want to be arrested, and you start to move away, are there times where they will not perceive you as moving away unless you're
if you comply with the order to leave and you are in the process of leaving, then you have not met the definition of trespassing. That doesn't mean that they won't arrest you and bring you to jail, but you have a very strong legal defense once you're in court. You know, all sorts of things happen on the street that don't necessarily follow my nice outline here. Cops could arrest you for absolutely no reason at all. But you know, the issue is whether or not you're going to be found guilty once you go to court. So to answer your question directly, if they give an order to leave and you are in the process of leaving and somehow they nab you while you are doing that, I would tell them, I am leaving, I am complying, and see if that might let them let you go to be on your way. You know, sometimes in mass protest scenarios, it's unclear which way is out, you know. If they say leave or be arrested and you're in the park, how far do you have to go? You know, should you walk out on the street so you're not in the park? You know, sometimes these things can get confusing. And if you ask the officers, where should I go? What should I do? They probably aren't going to answer you. What I would direct you, there's going to be legal observers, lots of them all around. They will likely be wearing bright green duct tape on their arms as armbands or bright green hats. They can assist you in trying to figure out which way is out, if that's what you're trying to do. There will also be peacekeepers around that may be available to assist with that function too. But generally, if you're on a public sidewalk and you're moving away from the crowd, you're going to be fine. Okay, so I put together a few of like the most common things that I've seen in my 15 years of representing activists. Disorderly conduct in the second degree. This is a misdemeanor. And basically, if you create a public inconvenience, that can be disorderly conduct. It's the most common crime that there is, really. Being in the roadway and blocking traffic is disorderly conduct. And there are potential constitutional defenses if you are in a public forum exercising your rights and they charge you with disorderly conduct. There's been a lot of cases about it, but that doesn't mean that you won't go to jail anyway. Another common one is interfering with a police officer. If a cop gives you a lawful order, you know, if they say, let's just say we are occupying the Fifth Street Market, and they say the owners of the Fifth Street Market have told you to leave or be arrested, that's a lawful order. Even if you question whether it's legal or not, if they spit it out, might as well treat it like it is for the purposes of interfering with a police officer. Another version of this crime is if you prevent a police officer from doing his lawful duties. So if they are arresting someone else and you're poking him in the arm, or you're in his face with a camera, or you're doing something where he's going to say, I can't perform my job because you are in my face, or you are making it so I can't do my job, that's interfering with a police officer. Cop watchers, or people who are going to be carrying video cameras or still cameras, or any kind of audio or video recording. In Oregon, there is a crime called intercepting communications. We should not be dealing with this in a public protest scenario, but for those of you that may be carrying cameras, the law says that you are supposed to put people on notice that you are filming them. You don't need to ask permission, you just need to put them on notice. So especially if you are cop watching, which means you are videoing an arrest of someone else, we recommend that as you put your camera to your face, you say, I am recording, in a loud enough voice for people to hear it. And now you have just set it into your own recording device, which will later be your evidence that you did so. As long as you say that, it is legal to do any kind of recording in a public space, which is 99.9% of what we'll be dealing with here. If you're cop watching and the police tell you to move back or get away, we suggest that you take little baby steps and slowly move backward until it seems like you are okay. If you stay in a space that they tell you you're not allowed to be in, you may very well get arrested for interfering with a police officer. Resisting arrest is when you intentionally try to stop a police officer from making an arrest, either yours or someone else's. Passive resistance, meaning going limp, is never considered resisting arrest. Running away, doing this so that they can't put your arms behind your back, laying on your front and tucking your arms underneath you so that they can't get your arms. All of those things are considered resisting arrest. I even had a case where the police alleged that my client, who was jumped while cop watching and was not expecting to be tackled by the police, tightened his arm muscles as he was being tackled, and they charged him with resisting arrest. He didn't get convicted of it, of course, but he got charged with it nonetheless. Harassment. If you subject another person to offensive physical contact. So, if you push a police officer, if you shove the sanitation department people, anything like that, that can potentially be harassment, including spitting, spraying people with water, potentially, all of those things could be harassment. Oops. Okay, assault on a police officer. Probably don't need to go into too much detail about that. That's fairly common sense. But attempting to injure a police officer could also be assault on a police officer. That's pretty serious. Assault on a police officer is a felony. We don't want anybody getting those. Attempt to assault a police officer is a misdemeanor, but it's still a very serious offense. Offensive littering, including leaving flyers and things, is an infraction in Eugene. Depositing burning material on a roadway also could get you into trouble. I wanted to kind of show you guys what the Eugene Code for Prohibited Camping looks like. This is it. It basically says that if your intention in setting up a campsite or a stove or whatnot is for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live, that is prohibited camping. It does not say in here that occupying a space for symbolic First Amendment purposes is camping. So we have an argument to be made that if an occupation is for a symbolic First Amendment purpose and not for the purpose of all of us setting up a temporary place to live, which most of us probably have a fine place to live, then we may not be engaged in prohibited camping. And again, that doesn't mean that they won't trespass every one of us if we remain after a lawful order, but I wanted to kind of show you that this is our law. This is the law that most people have been curious about. If you try to hide evidence or hide a human, or a common thing is the cops are coming after one person and everybody kind of tries to block the police from getting at that person, that could be hindering prosecution. Obstructing government administration is another weird crime that they like to throw things. If you intentionally impair the administration of the government, which could be blocking access to courthouses, as well as potentially assisting someone in getting away from the cops, that can be obstructing. Folks that might be thinking about flyering or doing some street relabeling of things and stuff of that nature. There is a Eugene code that makes it a violation for affixing, displaying, painting, etc. anything to our streets, trees, poles, etc., etc. If they catch you, you can be charged with an infraction. And an infraction means there's no jail, there's no probation. All they can do is fine you. Noise disturbance. So in Eugene, amplifying noise or creating a bunch of noise primarily between the hours of 10 and 6 in the morning can be a noise disturbance. It's a violation, meaning it's a ticket as well. If you have 3 or more in a year, you can get into a little more trouble. But technically, you are supposed to have a permit for those things. And even, radio, drums, and other musical instruments can be considered a noise violation between 10 and 7 especially. But again, we're balancing that with our First Amendment right to express ourselves in the mode that we want. There are some exemptions to the noise thing. Basically, they really want you to get permits for everything. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but kind of our mantra in terms of permits for Occupy Eugene is the only permit we need is the Bill of Rights. If anybody asks you about permits, your response could be, well, we've got the Bill of Rights, and that seems to be all the permit we need. So I also just wanted to kind of briefly touch on this downtown exclusion zone. I don't know how many of you guys have heard it, but the cops basically are trying to run riffraff and low-income people and economically disenfranchised individuals out of our downtown core. Personally, I think it's an issue that Occupy Eugene could really take on and possibly make some local real change on. I hate this law. We actually challenged it in Eugene Municipal Court and won, and then they changed the law slightly and are now reinforcing it again. So it seems that the consumer powers that be want a safe and pleasant shopping experience for everyone, which obviously ties into the work that we're doing. But the reason I put it up there is if you are charged with trespassing within this downtown zone, they can potentially trespass you from that zone for up to a year. If that happens to anyone, contact the CLDC because we're ready and willing to do some test case work here. And we think this is really unconstitutional. But for those of you that might work in the downtown or have reason to go in the downtown and you're worried that this might be a life-messing situation, there are exemptions for work and medical appointments and things like that. So even if you had those issues on board, don't be too feared with them.
Only if you trespass in the exclusion zone, you get excluded from.
That's right. That's right. And I think that was basically all I wanted to cover. Let me just make sure.
Lauren,
Yeah.
did you touch on the jaywalking issue at all?
Yeah. So in Eugene, we are supposed to be crossing the street at a nice right angle. We are ideally supposed to be using crosswalks. And even when the little guy flashes red before he totally turns red on those walk signs, flashing red means stop in terms of jaywalking. If and when any kind of marching, parading happens at some point in the occupation, you have to obey the crosswalks and you have to obey the traffic lights. If you don't, they can ticket you with jaywalking, which again is an infraction. It's not an arrestable offense, but it's an offense nonetheless. Unless we are being escorted in the streets, if we are marching and parading on sidewalks, just know that the group could, get split up based on traffic light stuff, and you need to obey them. Oftentimes at protests we've had here in Eugene, somebody will try to run to catch up to the group and will get tagged by the police for that infraction. So just to kind of wrap it up before I take a few questions, we're doing everything we can for Saturday to ensure that this is going to be a family-friendly, happy, yay day. We're going to announce the details of it on Friday morning at 9 a.m. It will not be disclosed until then, but we just want you to know we're trying to make Saturday all-inclusive, bring everyone. We'll have lots of lawyers and legal observers and entertainment and fun and, don't be, we don't want any fear-mongering to take place. I'm actually the point person for the police. We've met with them once. We're going to meet with them again, probably on Friday. And the mayor has, put in some solid support for Occupy Eugene. We don't have any enemies right now in terms of what we are symbolizing and what we're working on. So. Bring your friends and family and have a good time. And with that, I'm going to point you toward those brochures again, make sure everybody has one. And I would like the questions to be focused on the topics at hand. Don't ask me about getting evicted or something like that tonight.
Also, before questions, I'm going to pass around a donation jar. It costs money to put this event on tonight. We could use your help, so to help both the costs incurred by both of the sponsoring groups. I'm going to pass this around. So, sorry.
Yeah. Good.
If they do want to give you a ticket for an infraction, how do they communicate with you about that? And does that fit into the steps of detaining you?
Yes, they will detain you for the purpose of writing you an infraction. At that point, they will ask to see your ID, and you should say, my name is this, my date of birth is this, my address is this. They'll fill out the ticket, give it to you, and you should be able to walk away.
On the cop watching, you let them know I'm recording. Do you have to have your camera visible?
You don't have to have your camera visible, though ideally you do, but the important thing is just having your camera visible, even if it's a giant one, is not enough. Even if anybody in the world would know that you're recording, you need to say it to protect yourself legally. Yeah.
You mentioned going limp as a possibility of being arrested. Does that include sitting down or allowing yourself to fall down?
So the question is, with passive resistance, does that include sitting down or letting yourself fall down? Yes, usually sitting down or laying down. Hopefully you're not going to let yourself fall down, because they will let you fall down, and that is never fun. But sitting down, indicating that I am going limp or I'm passively resisting you or anything like that might be helpful, if you're trying not to get injured. And then, just go limp and let them carry you away. One thing on passive resistance, though, just to say it, they can drag you by the armpits, by the shoulders. Sometimes it can be a not pleasant experience. So, don't think that they're going to gingerly carry you like you are the queen of, Eugene, because they may not. Yeah?
Is there no cars? Does it happen to be no cars in the area, but the crosswalks are still red? Is that the
Yes. Yeah, even if there's no traffic, if you cross when the crosswalk doesn't say you can, that is jaywalking. Yeah.
Regarding camping, my understanding is that whether you're there overnight or not, the presence of tents or sleeping bags or anything like that is signs of camping, for which you can be cited.
Well, the camping ordinance basically says that camping is erecting any structure, tent, tarp, any of it is prohibited if your purpose is maintaining a temporary place to live. If you are erecting a tent as a vigil or anything like that, you may have a legal defense. Again, it doesn't mean that they won't roust you out of there, but yeah, according to the camping ordinance.
A few of us tried communal tent, a couple of sleeping bags, just
it's not going to make a difference. Like for instance, Portland originally was going to try Tarp City. They weren't going to have tents. They were just going to do tarps and pads, trying to avoid a technical definition of camping in their ordinance, and it wasn't going to fly legally. We are, if an encampment happens, we are illegally camping. There may be negotiations that will allow that to remain, and there may be technical defenses that we will employ after the fact, but there's no real dancing around what you're doing. But you also reminded me of another thing. Generally, there are also city park codes that say it is illegal to be in the city parks from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. So, for folks that are trying to be squeaky clean and analyze their options in terms of potential arrest or not, being there overnight may be slightly more technically illegal than being there during the day.
Does Eugene have a curfew for minors? Would that be an issue?
Yeah, there is a curfew for minors during the school weeks, unless their parents give them permission. So.
What does that permission have to look?
Well, hopefully, parent is around. Or, I don't know if a note in the pocket of the kid is really going to work with the cops, but if they were charged with violating curfew, a defense to that charge would be the parent stating, I knew he was there, he had permission, blah, blah, blah. I think you were up first.
I'm a little bit curious about resisting arrest. Can you talk a bit more about it? I've heard of cases where protesters have been charged with resisting arrest and no other charges. Could you explain how that would possibly happen?
I love it when they do that, because that is not really, you can't have just a resisting arrest charge. Most prosecutors won't file if there's only a resisting arrest charge. They have to have a lawful basis to arrest you in order for you to be resisting that arrest. There's also a defense that if the police are using excessive force on you, an impermissible amount of force, that your resistance of it, if it's to maintain your bodily integrity, can potentially be a defense. I don't want you to be testing that out necessarily, but it's a potential defense. Is that enough of an elaboration? Okay, great.
In New York City and a couple of other places, there were some pepper spraying incidents, and I was just wondering if you could talk about what the law is in Oregon as far as when a police officer can actually legally spray you.
Sure. And what?
And batons.
Yeah, they're
So, okay, use of force in general. A police officer is allowed to use a reasonable amount of force given the scenario that they face at the time. They are allowed to use things like pepper spray and batons and physical force as pain compliance tools to effect a lawful order. So, to give you an example, if people are locked down in the middle of the street symbolically, and the police say, get up, or, we're going to do things to you, they are legally allowed to try to wrench your arm behind your back. They are legally allowed to potentially pepper spray you. They are normally required to give you a warning that they're going to use such force. And often, especially with pepper spray, they do, because they want to scare you to voluntarily comply. In Eugene, obviously, we've also had some issues with tasers. The police have promised us that they will not use tasers against First Amendment type activity and protest activity. Tasers are not supposed to be pain compliance. They're only supposed to be if you are exerting a threat of violence toward them. But we sure hope that nothing like that is happening. And so far, the communications we've had with the police, like I mentioned, have been positive. We don't think they're going to be antagonistic toward us, which has kind of been the motivating factor for some of those other situations. But you know, there is no way to guarantee anyone that if they purposely put themselves in an arrest scenario, that any of those tactics might not be deployed upon them.
Including the batons, like they can use them if they've told you to move, you peacefully resist, they can use the batons.
Depending on the scenario. I bet you're thinking of the YouTube video of New York where you see those cops whacking into the crowd like that. The reason that they will argue that that was justified is because they were literally surrounded by a crowd of thousands that were pushing on them and being aggressive toward them. It's unlikely we may have a similar situation like that, but that type of situation would be really the only time that you would get to the point where that type of force might be warranted. Yeah. Yes.
So while we may not be able to erect a tarp city or have a bunch of tents for everybody, would we still be able to have reasonable shelter over certain things like a PA system or a drum circle or that sort of thing, where people aren't actively living, but just keeping something dry?
You know, I don't think it really legally matters whether you set up a nice tarp or you set up a tent or whatnot. I think if they're going to call it illegal camping, it's going to be illegal camping. My personal belief is that if there's going to be an encampment, people should come with their camping gear. Yeah.
So is there a right to self-care at Oregon Country Fair, our internal rights? That's one of the primary ones. And is there any corresponding legal right?
Well, what do you mean by that, self-care?
Well, like water, which, by the way, we are all forgetting. But
do you have the right to water while you're in jail?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, yeah, but don't expect that it's going to be like what you get when you're a free person. You know, yeah, there's water. You'll get fed 3 meals a day.
Well, food that you can eat, but like...
No, you're not, you know, you're not really guaranteed a vegan or vegetarian diet, especially with short-term stays. You know, if you're actually going to federal prison, yeah, you actually are guaranteed a vegetarian diet. But for short-term stays, you know, you may get a bologna sandwich and an apple. Yeah.
So the camping law is for Oregon specifically, because in Manhattan they have tents, they've been able to camp.
The code I showed you is Eugene specific. Almost every city has their own. They're pretty much all generally the same. They say, you know, unless you get an exemption or a permit or whatnot, you know, or Eugene actually has some historic examples of other tent cities that have occurred. Actually, after World War II, in the Whitaker neighborhood, there was a park that became a tent city for over a year with folks coming home from the war. There have been other examples that we actually researched on the legal committee of other times where encampments have been permitted here. But yeah, technically that was the statute, and that's what they could potentially enforce if they wanted to. How about in the back?
So I have a back condition. I'm just wondering if I get like tug or push or something like that while being arrested, should I just leave the city during the arrest, or find me
Well, I think the safest bet would be not place yourself in a situation where you might be injured, unfortunately. If somehow you ended up in a situation where you were about to be arrested, you need to immediately tell them, you know, I'm disabled, I have a back injury, if this and that happens, this could happen to me. Sometimes they'll believe you, sometimes they won't, which is why your safest bet is to not put yourself in that situation. Yeah.
What are the boundaries of the exclusion zone?
The downtown core, basically, it covers like the food kitchen, the bus station, the library, you know, anywhere that a homeless person would like to go has been part of that exclusion zone. If you go on the Eugene website and put in downtown exclusion zone, there is actual maps. CLDC has some of the maps over at our office, but I didn't bring them tonight. I don't know who has been having their hand up first. Sorry. Go ahead.
In your discussions with the police, was there any conversation regarding our tent city? And was there an indication by them that they were going to enforce that rule?
We brought up the concept in a general sense, and they said that it would be the chief of police's call. That they had no orders at this time what to do when and if it happened, it would be the chief's call with input from the mayor and city manager.
Over here?
Yeah.
Hi. Would setting up and cooking and distributing food for everybody be considered camping?
I think Food Not Bombs does it once a week. So no, I don't think that simply delivering food to people would be evidence of attempting to set up a temporary place to live. Though if they wanted to enforce a camping thing, no. If it was as long as it wasn't during those park curfew hours, setting up tables and having a picnic in a public place for others would not be an illegal act. Yeah, go ahead.
If you're given a ticket or a citation, does Oregon law require that you sign it? And if yes, and you refuse to sign it, does that escalate anything beyond that? Not sign, refusing to sign?
No. Let's take 3 more, and then we'll pass it off to Michael. Yeah.
So regarding the camping, what do you think would happen if people engage in a 24-hour vigil, you're not camping, you're not even going to sleep, and then they switch, and other people do the same thing, so that no one person could even be conceived of as camping. Is that a possibility?
Sure. Yeah.
We could just be narcoleptic.
Yeah.
Would a canopy attached to a legally parked RV or bus that's legally parked on the street be permissible, do you think?
It would depend on the location and what we're talking about in terms of where you're parked and whatnot. I think there are some bans on sleeping in your RV overnight in certain areas of the city, but as long as you were avoiding those areas, potentially. It would really depend on the exact scenario. I don't think there's a clear yes or no to that. Yeah.
There's one forum in Occupy Eugene that I'm paying attention to, trying to see the morale forum, and street performance is something I want to do for that. In that scenario, what is probably the best way, what kind of bubble of protection is there, or some way of going about that? Being more safe about, I'm here to be a part of this movement and put what work I have out there.
Well, street performance is... Okay. So street performance is a great protected form of First Amendment expression, especially if you're clearly doing that. As long as you're not blocking ingress and egress, meaning as long as you're not blocking the ins and outs of doors or sidewalks, and as long as you're not out in the road blocking traffic, you're green light.
All right.
Yes, and you'll be the last.
If you're in front of the city or you're taking the Japanese and you go through their flow chart, what range might it end up costing?
Well, assuming that you are cited into Eugene Municipal Court, you could probably expect between a $100 or a $500 fine, but the city also has work crew and community service to earn off fines so that you don't actually have to come up with money. They also have payment plans, and there's lots of potential negotiations that can happen. Like for instance, if you're a first-time offender, there's something called a diversion agreement where if you obey all laws for 6 months, the charge goes away. And there might be like a $100 fee for that you can make installment payments or work it off. All right, so if anybody has any questions that didn't get a chance to be answered now, you can kind of see me in the back of the room. Go on our website, cldc.org, if you want any of these other resources.